June 14, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Normandy countryside. A thin mist clings to the rolling hills, hiding the jagged hedgerows and muddy paths below. Somewhere in the distance, the dull thud of German artillery echoes, punctuated by the sudden hiss of falling shells. On a ridge, a single Sherman tank crests the hill. The commander squints through the periscope, eyes tracing the dark silhouettes of anti-tank guns sprawled across the valley. Dust rises with each tread as the tank lumbers forward, the engine growling beneath the tension. Inside, men grip their weapons, hearts pounding in rhythm with the churning treads. Without warning, a shell slams into the slope behind them, showering dirt into the morning air. Yet the Sherman presses on. Across the hills, dozens more tanks appear, advancing in calculated chaos. German crews, accustomed to dominating these heights, freeze at the sudden movement, unprepared for the audacity of the armored assault. The stage is set, the hills alive with the scent of oil, sweat, and impending fire. The question looms, why would American tanks charge so recklessly into the teeth of German artillery, risking everything? The answer begins here, among the mud and metal of Normandy's waking battlefield. By mid-June 1944, the Normandy invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, was no longer a simple beachhead operation. D-Day, June 6th, had succeeded in establishing a tenuous foothold along the coast, but the real challenge awaited inland. The bocage, Normandy's dense hedgerow country, presented an unexpected obstacle. Thick earthen walls, interlaced with tangled hedges, turned the countryside into a labyrinth, ideal for defensive positions. For American forces advancing from Omaha and Utah beaches, every field, every lane became a potential trap. The U.S. First Army, under General Omar Bradley, faced immediate pressure to break out from these confined zones. Their armored divisions, the 2nd and 3rd, were equipped with M4 Sherman tanks, which were reliable but lightly armored compared to the heavier German panzers. Standard doctrine emphasized careful, coordinated advances with infantry clearing the way. Yet the bocage often forced improvisation. Tanks could not rely on open maneuvering. Hedgerows limited visibility and made them vulnerable to ambush from concealed 80mm guns and Panzerfaust teams hidden behind embankments. German forces, meanwhile, were rapidly reorganizing after the shock of D-Day. The 7th Army and elements of the Panzer Lehr Division were tasked with halting the Allied advance. Artillery and machine gun nests were meticulously positioned on hilltops and behind hedgerows, creating interlocking fields of fire. German commanders understood the terrain intimately and expected the Allies to struggle. Intelligence reports suggested that Americans would proceed cautiously, using combined arms to probe defenses before committing armor. However, American tank commanders were learning quickly. Crews who had trained in open deserts or plains were now faced with the irregularity of hedgerows, muddy fields, and narrow lanes. The need for rapid movement became clear. Speed could neutralize prepared artillery positions by limiting the time gunners had to adjust, and surprise could compensate for the Sherman's thinner armor. On June 12, 1944, reconnaissance reported a cluster of German artillery emplacements near a series of hills overlooking a critical lane toward St. Lo. The natural high ground gave the Germans near-total observational control of the surrounding countryside. Under normal circumstances, infantry would approach first, artillery would soften the positions, and only then would tanks advance. But delaying meant giving the Germans time to reposition, call in reinforcements, or strike with mobile panzer units. Thus, commanders faced a choice: follow cautious doctrine or gamble on speed and shock. The decision to push tanks aggressively across exposed terrain would become a defining feature of the Normandy breakout. By mid-June 1944, German defenses in Normandy were a calculated network of firepower, observation points, and obstacles designed to crush any advance. The Bocage countryside, deceptively serene, concealed deadly surprises. Each hedgerow, sometimes 10 feet high and reinforced with earth, hid 80-meter flak guns, anti-tank ditches, and machine gun nests. German artillery observers, perched on hilltops, could direct fire with precision, their lines of sight stretching for miles across the patchwork of fields. American intelligence underestimated some of these positions. Reconnaissance photos captured hedgerows and farm lanes, but the thick foliage masked the scale of prepared defenses. As Sherman tanks advanced, crews found themselves exposed to a volley of shells before they could identify targets. Unlike previous campaigns in North Africa or Italy, Normandy offered few open spaces. Every approach was covered by intersecting fields of fire, and any pause became deadly. The Panzer Lehr Division and elements of the 353rd Infantry Division were central to the German defensive strategy. Experienced soldiers manned the artillery, trained to anticipate American armor movements, and relied on coordinated counterattacks. Communication between units was efficient. Forward observers relayed tank positions to gunners who could fire before the enemy even fully revealed themselves. Yet, this confidence had a vulnerability, an assumption that Americans would move methodically, inching forward behind infantry screens. Meanwhile, American armored commanders were adapting. The M4 Sherman, though less armored than German panzers, offered mobility and mechanical reliability. Its 75mm gun could engage artillery positions effectively at moderate range, and its speed over rough terrain, if leveraged aggressively, could disrupt German expectations. Some tank leaders began experimenting with unorthodox maneuvers, charging across open ridges, using hedgerows as temporary cover, and relying on surprise rather than prolonged artillery duels. The early skirmishes revealed both the danger and the opportunity. At places like Carentan and near St. Lo, Sherman tanks moving rapidly over hills forced German crews to make split-second decisions. Hesitation could be fatal. American tankers discovered that audacious advances could outpace the Germans' ability to aim and fire accurately. Small, coordinated pushes across hills, timed with infantry movements and smoke screens, began to unbalance even the most disciplined German defenses. This environment of dense hedgerows, commanding hills, and entrenched artillery created a crucible in which bold tank tactics would emerge. Speed, audacity, and calculated risk became the tools for success. It was in this context that American tank crews would begin their famous charges, racing across Normandy's hills, shocking German artillery crews, and redefining armored warfare in the European theater. Human angle. The tank crews. Inside each Sherman, men were a mix of young soldiers, some barely 19, facing their first taste of armored combat. The roar of the engine, the smell of oil, the occasional rattle of incoming fire, these became constant companions. Fear was tangible, but so was resolve. Tank commanders relied on instinct honed in training, sometimes improvising maneuvers to avoid known artillery zones. Gunners aimed with a mix of calculation and intuition, knowing that a single misfire could cost lives. The men formed a fragile brotherhood, each action dependent on the other. Every crest of a hill brought the risk of instant death, yet every successful dash across open terrain cemented confidence. Tactical angle. Speed versus doctrine. Normandy's bocage demanded innovation. Standard doctrine emphasized infantry-first advances, with tanks supporting cautiously. But the Americans discovered a paradox. Speed could be a weapon. By racing across exposed hills, Shermans reduced the time German gunners had to aim, forcing them into panic or rushed shots. Tanks moving in unexpected patterns, zigzags, sudden charges, flanking maneuvers, disrupted German firing solutions. Tactical audacity became a force multiplier. Commanders understood that hesitation favored the enemy, Bold, rapid movement could collapse even the most fortified positions. Technological angle. The Sherman advantage and limits. The M4 Sherman was reliable, mobile, and relatively easy to repair, but its armor could be penetrated by German 75mm and 88mm guns. Its 75mm gun, though outmatched in firepower by heavier panzers, was sufficient against soft targets and artillery positions. The tank's mechanical reliability meant that commanders could risk repeated advances without fear of breakdowns mid-hill. Modifications such as extra sandbags or makeshift armor were common, reflecting adaptability. The Sherman's speed and maneuverability became decisive when paired with audacious tactics, allowing crews to reach and neutralize artillery before the Germans could recalibrate. Leadership angle, command decisions on the ground. At the division and battalion level, commanders faced the constant tension between caution and audacity. General Omar Bradley encouraged aggressive exploitation of weaknesses in German lines, emphasizing speed and surprise over strict adherence to doctrine. Lower-level leaders, such as tank platoon commanders, had to interpret these orders in real time, often making split-second decisions under fire. Choosing when to charge a ridge or hold back for infantry support could determine the survival of entire crews. The success of these maneuvers depended on decentralized leadership, trusting individual commanders to act boldly when opportunity arose. Enemy angle. German artillery crews. German gunners were trained to dominate the battlefield with precision fire. From their vantage points on Normandy's hills, they expected American advances to be methodical, predictable, and cautious. When Sherman tanks surged unexpectedly across ridges, artillery crews were often caught off guard. Targets appeared suddenly, in patterns they had not anticipated. Coordination broke down. Rapid tank movement forced crews into rushed calculations, increasing error and vulnerability. For many, the first sight of a tank cresting a hill was met with disbelief, a moment of paralysis that American forces exploited mercilessly. Moral, psychological angle. The impact of these maneuvers extended beyond physical destruction. Tank crews felt a surge of confidence with each successful charge, while German soldiers experienced disorientation and dread. The speed and audacity of American armor shifted the psychological balance of engagements. Fear could immobilize defenders, leading to premature retreats or mistakes in targeting. For the Allies, every crest conquered reinforced the belief that bold tactics could overcome entrenched defenses, creating momentum that was as much mental as physical. July 7, 1944. The morning sun cuts through a light mist over the hills near Saint-Lô. The bocage lies quiet, deceptively calm. German artillery positions, manned by veteran crews, sit on commanding ridges, their 80mm guns trained on the lanes below. Reconnaissance reports suggest the Americans will advance cautiously. They are wrong. At 700 hours, the lead Sherman platoon crests the first ridge. The tank commander, Lieutenant James "Jim" Callahan, peers through his periscope and spots the German gun line. Without hesitation, he accelerates forward. Tracks churn the dew-soaked earth. Shells explode behind them, hurling mud into the morning air. But the tanks push onward, climbing the second ridge at full speed. The Germans fire, but many rounds strike empty ground. The speed and angle of approach make accurate targeting almost impossible. By 7:15 hours, a column of 8 Shermans races across the open crest, moving in staggered formation. Smoke from destroyed hedgerows obscures vision. Infantry follows, using the chaos to advance in relative safety. German artillery crews scramble, shouting orders, adjusting sight lines, but the advancing tanks reach point-blank range before the guns can respond effectively. Explosions rip through positions. Some guns are destroyed outright, others abandoned by crews fleeing in confusion. The shock is immediate and total. German commanders report, enemy armor appeared suddenly on the ridges. Fire could not be adjusted. Positions overrun in minutes. This rapid, audacious advance is not an accident. It is the product of meticulous planning, daring leadership, and the Sherman's mechanical reliability. What had been a static defensive position, assumed secure, now collapses under the unrelenting momentum of American armor. By 0730 hours, the hill is under American control. Artillery observers are captured, guns destroyed or silenced. The tactical surprise shifts the battlefield. German lines falter. Their response is fragmented and disorganized. The Americans have transformed a perilous terrain disadvantage into a decisive operational success. By late morning on July 7th, the American push had intensified. Sherman tanks, reinforced by accompanying infantry, moved across successive ridges, each crest revealing new German artillery positions. The initial shock had disoriented the defenders, but remnants of the Panzer Lehr division were regrouping, attempting counterattacks with panzers and mobile artillery. Lieutenant Callahan's unit, now part of a larger armored task force, encountered a secondary ridge dominated by well-camouflaged 88mm guns. At 0945 hours, they came under concentrated fire. A direct hit penetrated the side armor of one Sherman, igniting fuel and ammunition. The crew evacuated under heavy smoke, but the advance did not stall. Adjacent tanks split formation, flanking the German positions while suppressive fire covered the infantry. Within 20 minutes, the ridge was secured. Survivors of the German crews either surrendered or fled, leaving their guns behind. By noon, American forces had seized a critical network of hills overlooking the road to St. Lo. The speed and audacity of the armored advance had prevented the Germans from establishing coordinated artillery fire. Communications were disrupted, orders became contradictory, and morale plummeted. A captured German officer later wrote, "We were certain the Americans would crawl forward behind their infantry. Instead, they struck like a storm, and our guns could not respond in time." Throughout the day, American tank crews repeated the pattern. Rapid ascents of exposed ridges, sudden engagement of artillery positions, and swift consolidation of captured terrain. Sherman reliability proved vital. Mechanical failures were minimal, and crews adapted on the fly to obstacles, using hedgerows for cover, and exploiting every gap in German defenses. By evening, the consequences were clear. Dozens of artillery pieces had been destroyed, hundreds of German soldiers captured or neutralized, and the path toward St. Lo partially opened. The audacious use of speed and surprise had transformed a narrow, perilous advance into a decisive operational advantage. The Normandy hills, once dominated by entrenched German artillery, now bore the tracks of American tanks, a testament to planning, courage, and mechanical resilience. This climactic push set the stage for the aftermath. German forces forced to regroup, casualties counted, and the strategic implications of this armored initiative fully realized. By the evening of July 7th, the battlefield bore the scars of relentless armored assault. Normandy's hills, once dominated by German artillery, were now littered with destroyed guns, overturned hedgerows, and the smoldering remains of vehicles. American reports estimated that over 20 artillery positions had been neutralized in a matter of hours, an achievement few had thought possible in such open, exposed terrain. Casualties, though significant, were limited compared to the potential losses had the attack stalled under concentrated fire. Sherman crews who survived spoke of the mixture of fear and exhilaration that came with racing across hills under direct enemy observation. German forces were forced into rapid reorganization. Units that had counted on carefully constructed kill zones were scattered, some retreating toward secondary defensive lines. Communications breakdowns compounded the chaos. Forward observers could not relay accurate targeting information, and commanders struggled to coordinate counterattacks. The psychological impact was profound. The perception of invincibility in their artillery positions had been shattered. Reports from the 7th Army headquarters noted, American armored units display uncharacteristic aggression and speed. Traditional defenses are failing. American leadership recognized both the tactical and symbolic importance of the operation. Lieutenant Callahan's unit, and others like it, demonstrated that speed and audacity could compensate for the Sherman's thinner armor. The lessons were rapidly incorporated into doctrine. Where hedgerows or open ridges presented extreme risk, aggressive armored maneuvers could disorient the enemy and seize the initiative. Infantry units accompanying the tanks capitalized on the breakthrough. With German artillery suppressed, troops moved into previously unreachable areas, securing villages and cutting off supply routes. The combined arms approach, though improvised in execution, highlighted the adaptability of American forces in Normandy. The psychological momentum generated by these daring charges would influence subsequent operations, reinforcing the importance of initiative and speed in breaking German defensive networks. By July 8th, reports reached Allied command summarizing the full impact of the armored advance. The U.S. First Army had secured critical high ground, opening routes toward St. Lo and weakening the German hold over central Normandy. Estimates indicated that over 150 German soldiers were captured, dozens of artillery pieces destroyed, and at least 30 tanks and armored vehicles either destroyed or abandoned during the engagement. While the Americans suffered losses, roughly 25 Shermans disabled or destroyed, the operation was deemed a tactical success, validating the use of speed and surprise over cautious incremental advances. German commanders faced immediate strategic dilemmas. The destruction of artillery positions and the loss of commanding ridges disrupted defensive cohesion. Counterattacks became increasingly risky, as American forces now held both momentum and advantageous terrain. Psychological strain was evident in field reports. Artillery crews and infantry units reported heightened stress and confusion. As one German officer wrote in his diary, "Our lines have become unpredictable to us. The enemy moves faster than we can calculate." The operational lessons extended beyond Normandy. American armored doctrine evolved, emphasizing that agility and audacity could outweigh numerical or firepower disadvantages. Tank crews trained in open-field tactics now applied the same principles to complex, restrictive terrains, like the bocage. The engagement highlighted the importance of mechanical reliability, decisive leadership, and rapid decision-making in the heat of battle. Strategically, this breakthrough contributed to the eventual Allied push toward St. Lo, a key objective for linking beachheads and establishing continuous supply lines inland. The audacious use of Shermans in exposed terrain forced German commanders to reconsider their assumptions about American tactics, altering their defensive calculations for subsequent engagements across Normandy. By nightfall, the hills stood under American control. The shattered German artillery, abandoned positions, and advancing Shermans were not just physical markers. They symbolized a shift in the momentum of the campaign. What had begun as a calculated risk became a turning point, demonstrating that ingenuity and courage could redefine the rules of armored warfare. The hills of Normandy, scarred by shell craters and the tracks of Sherman tanks, tell a story beyond maps and battle reports. They speak of courage under fire, of young men trusting each other and their machines to survive impossible odds. In that foggy dawn of July 7, 1944, speed became a weapon, audacity a shield. American tanks raced across open ground not because they were invincible, but because they understood that hesitation in war often carries a heavier price than risk. This moment reshaped armored warfare. It proved that terrain, no matter how restrictive, could be overcome through bold maneuvering, rapid decision-making, and disciplined improvisation. German artillery, once a symbol of unassailable dominance, was humbled by the combination of mechanical reliability and human determination. The psychological shock inflicted by audacious advances became as lethal as shells or bullets, demonstrating that warfare is fought as much in the mind as on the field. Ultimately, these charges across Normandy's hills were more than a tactical victory. They were a testament to adaptability, courage, and the relentless pursuit of opportunity in chaos. They remind us that history is often decided not by the largest guns, but by those willing to seize the moment, even when every risk seems insurmountable. The hills remain quiet now, but etched forever with the echoes of engines, gunfire, and the indomitable human spirit.